With me today is Taylor Burns. We're going to talk about her in a moment. Um, to start this off, we're going to do something a little bit different. Uh, Typically, we have a guest on our show. Taylor is great, but she's not a guest. She is actually part of our core team. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. Um, and the way we typically run this is we'll start with a little bit of background about our company, our team, our project. We then move back to the guest. We talk with a guest for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes about their personal background, how they got into space, because I think that's super important to understand where people are coming from, to figure out kind of where they're going. And then we jump into usually talking about the business, the finance, the economics, the money of space. We feel that's a kind of an underappreciated topic in the world. And considering it's a $500 billion industry and it's going to become a multi-trillion-dollar industry, I think it's time to start talking about and following the money, because that tells an interesting and important story. So we're not going to be doing that very much. That's not what we're going to be doing tonight, although we do have some great guests coming up. We have Stan Scholl, Sean McClinton, and Michael Doyle. They're with Space Northwest, and they're hosting a Techstars startup weekend this weekend. They're going to give us a report about the event afterwards. So in about 2 weeks or so, they're going to be joining us. We've got a reporter that's going to be doing a story on Liftport, and they've agreed to do the Q&A on camera. So we're actually going to do a story about Liftport from the perspective of a reporter. I have seen the questions already, and they're pretty intriguing. I promise you, this is not a plant. This is a reporter that came to us that wanted to ask questions in the first place. And I agreed to their interview, and then they agreed to do it my way. So it should be an interesting story. I know some of the questions. Even people that have been following our project for 2 decades probably don't know the answers to these questions. So it should be pretty intriguing. So I'm kind of excited about it. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it the way that I asked. They were going to do the story anyway. It felt more authentic doing it this way. So I think that's exciting. In 2 different Mars-themed programs, we're going to have the executive director of the Mars Society, James Burke, is going to join us. His interview got cut accidentally due to a technical glitch on our end a couple weeks ago. So we're gonna dive back into that conversation with him. That's going to be on the 12th of December. We've got the founder of the Mars Society, Dr. Robert Zubrin, is going to join us on the 5th. They are not talking about the same things, so don't skip one because you think you heard it from the other guy. The Dr. Zubrin conversation should not be missed. I think he's going to say some pretty darn important stuff. That's not to say that all of our other guests are not making important statements, but I think this one from Dr. Zubrin is going to be pretty important. And then also, because we had such an interesting conversation a few weeks ago, our guests have already asked that Dr. Roger Lanius come back to finish the conversation that we were having 2 weeks ago. He was just getting into some really interesting compare-contrast between the past and the future of space. And coming from the curator of the Smithsonian Institution and the former chief historian of NASA, to have somebody with his perspective looking at the history of space and then using that as an overlay for the future, I think that's super important. So we have some great guests coming up. definitely join us. We're going to post our Eventbrite page here, so definitely try to capture that, and join our Eventbrite page for information, and also our Discord channel. We're going to be talking about our Discord channel a lot. We haven't talked about it for actually probably 6 months, so we're going to start pushing that a little bit. I hope that works for you. And with that, I'm going to start with kind of some background of our company and organization, because that's, we've gotten some feedback that that's pretty important. So Liftport started out, even before Liftport existed. I was a part of the NASA Institute for Advanced Research Projects for NASA. I was a part of an independent contractor team that was looking at the space elevator 20 years ago, 2001, 2, and 3, under the NASA umbrella, looking at the space elevator. And if the space elevator is your first project in space, it's safe to say that nothing mundane is going to interest you ever again. So that's how I got started, and that's kind of where I've stayed. I like working on big projects that are just at the edge, the fuzzy edge of fact versus fiction. And if that's my starting point, it's pretty hard to do anything less than that. So I've worked on some projects on space-based solar power. I've done some consulting to federal and international governments on space stuff. It's been a pretty exciting last 20 years. It's been a bumpy last 20 years. So under the NASA umbrella at first, and then we were orphaned from NASA because NASA did not continue any funding on the space elevator. So that's when I created Liftport, the first version in 2001, 2, and 3. We primarily focused on nanotechnology and string to work on the Earth elevator. And we also worked on the robotics, the mechanical processes of climbing. I have a bunch of the artifacts, sitting here in my office. It's kind of museum-like. We have a bunch of that stuff here. Fast forward 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we did that work. And then 2007, bad things happened. The U.S. economy started crashing. Our funding came from my personal wealth, primarily. There were other people involved, but primarily came from my personal wealth relating to real estate. And when the real estate market started collapsing, we got crushed. And so we closed the doors in 2007. And then pretty amazingly, we reopened the doors in 2017. So 10 years had passed, where we started focusing on the lunar space elevator infrastructure. And that's our total focus now. We haven't worked on the Earth elevator for more than 10 years, 15 years. And we work on the lunar space elevator. And things we're a much smaller team. When the first version of Liftport closed, we had between 9 and 14 people, depending on which year we're talking about. The current version is only 6, so better than it was, but not 14, and certainly we don't have the same financial resources. So in 2017, 18, 19, we were pretty quiet. There were just 3 of us, and mostly all we were doing at that point was writing papers and kind of working out math and plans. 2020 came around, and we thought we were about to grow, but then the world caught on fire, and so we came very close to closing down again. Instead, we pivoted to we had a choice. We could either quit again, but if we did, we'd probably never come back to life. So rather than quit altogether, we pivoted to doing online conferences as a service. So the world was still meeting, but people weren't meeting face to face. So we did 27 digital conferences. Out of that, we've had more than 500 guest speakers. We have hundreds of hours of content on our YouTube channel. We'll post that here in a moment. And then in 2022, at the end of 2022, the world is changing again. And so the thing we did to stay alive during the pandemic is also the thing we're using to grow beyond the pandemic. So we're not doing as many conferences as a service anymore. We do have some planned and contracted in 2023. We have our own events that we're doing. I'll tell you about that in a moment. But we're also beginning to branch into more of a media asset company and building out what we refer to as podcasting as a service. So we have our own shows. This one, we do this Mondays and Wednesdays. And we have 2 other clients that are building shows with us. So we won't do a spoiler alert on those just yet, but we're pretty excited about doing that. And we're going to grow that podcasting as a service network into many, many shows. So that's a pretty exciting shift. It does look, candidly, it's lucrative. It's lucrative for us to do that. And that money cycles back to building an elevator on the moon. So you can imagine building an elevator on the moon is not very lucrative. We found a way to bootstrap our path by doing media production. So that's pretty exciting. It's a strange path. It's a bumpy, unconventional path, but that's where we are. So pretty excited about that. And then that brings us back to Taylor. So Taylor has joined our team off and on over the last 18 months as we have started to grow. We need her skills more and more. So she is our science communicator. That's going to be her role going forward. And this is the first time she's been on air. So Taylor, great to have you here. We're excited about that. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. Thank you for the opportunity, Michael, this one and all the others and the ones to come in the future. So my background really starts with me being a New Orleans-based outdoors person. I grew up fishing and boating, and that somehow matriculated into me pursuing a bachelor's degree in environmental science at Loyola University with some courses also with a dual enrollment at Tulane University. And as many people may or may not know, New Orleans isn't really a aerospace centric or popularized region per se. So I found myself in this niche of the aerospace world, and it's thankfully tied into the very obvious challenges of being a water-centric, a water-based culture, economy, and so forth. New Orleans and Louisiana have access to the life resource, being water, that is not necessarily as accessible in all the other places, all the other spots on the globe. So I do feel lucky to have a culture, a background, a nature, if you will, based around water. So my degree is in environmental science, and I've done research and opportunities ranging from marine biology to tropical medicine to public health. And now I found myself in the aerospace world. And I can say that it's been very comforting to have a foot in the door of the space world, of the space economy, to have a space-based knowledge space that I'm beginning to build. Because one of the things that I've kind of concluded, or a working hypothesis, if you will, is that a lot of the solutions to the environmental and ecological and economic challenges and burdens that have worried me as I pursued my degree and experiences is that many of the solutions that we will need for future generations, for future decades and eons and such, perhaps a lot of those solutions are in space. Perhaps they are off planet. Perhaps they are beyond this blue marble that we love and live in, that we rely on. So it has been comforting to come across, to have a gateway of possibility, of the future, of hope. So it's been a phenomenal ride, to say the least.
Well, it's terrific having you. We really look forward to the things that you're going to be doing with us. So it's exciting. On that note, how today's show came together was from Taylor. So it was her idea. So she's in the hot seat tonight. We at Liftport are building. We're building a better future. And so what we're also doing economically is we are building a separate subsidiary called Better Futures, betterfutures.space. And that's going to be a separate company that holds all of our media assets. Again, it does bring us enough revenue that we can start working on the lunar elevator, and we hope to make some real progress on that in 2023. But as we have built our programming, Taylor came to us with an idea maybe 3 weeks ago or so about some sort of kind of update, news style event. And we were supposed to have a guest tonight, but we had a last minute cancellation. So at about 3 o'clock today, we said, well, gosh, what are we going to do? And we resurrected Taylor's good idea. So what we're going to do today is go through the news and talk about maybe putting it a little bit into context. So our main program really revolves around our guests, and as I said, we have some great ones lining up. But we're also considering this program as a new program, where it's just a news review. And gosh, there's so much news that comes out on a daily basis. It's hard to keep up. So that's kind of exciting. We're not prepared to build a new show just yet. We want to get our ducks in a row for the current show, the DareGreatly show. So we're not using this today as a platform. This is really a test for things that we would like to do. So I'd love to have your feedback on this, plus or minus, and let us know what you're thinking. And with that, we're gonna jump into the news. I'm gonna start. Oh, and it's super important to let you know, we have a small but internally very active Discord channel that we're using regularly. My team and I, we scan the news pretty much every day. We're looking for what's relevant to us. We use the news as something to tweet about and to post about. We have a lot of activity at LinkedIn. That's probably our favorite platform. Shout out to everybody at LinkedIn. They're paying attention today. Thank you. We're grateful. And so I scan the news. The team scans the news. We talk about what's interesting, and then we post it. And that's one of the things that Taylor and Leah do really, really well, is just getting out there and telling our story. But we host all of this news at our Discord channel, and you're welcome to join. That's our Better Futures Discord channel. It's relatively small because we really haven't even been talking about it for the last several months. But that's the tool that we're going to try to grow into a community-based tool going forward. So with all that feels like a really long preamble. Let's get into the news here. So I'm going to start with a tweet. I'm going to do some screen sharing here. A tweet from Eric Berger. Now, I'm a big fan of Eric. He is a terrific follow on Twitter. He writes for Ars Technica. He writes for a bunch of places, but Ars Technica is the place I get most of my stuff in. But this line here in the middle, the decade of the moon has begun. Taylor, when you hear something like that, what do you think? I mean, if you just read this thing, it's like, in the previous 50 years, 15 spacecraft launched from America to the moon. After tonight, in the last 5 months, another 15 spacecraft will have. The decade of the moon has begun. You're new to this, Taylor. What do you think when you hear this? What do you imagine? What do you hope for? What do you worry about?
Well, it's interesting to think of even the words moon and beginning. Those two words in a sentence alone are enough to chew on, because of course we have to think in millennia. We have to think in tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years, which is quite difficult for the typical human. And so for the typical person. So I guess it is important to have a healthy skepticism, to have a balanced and metered, hopeful outlook, and to not necessarily jump the gun on any type of cautionary tales. I think it's best to try to be as open-minded as possible while retaining a sense of morality or ethics, because of course there's a lot to be excited about, there's a lot to dream about, and then there's also a lot to be apprehensive about, because as far as I know, we've been restricted to one planet. And, we can see on a daily basis, we see the moon, we see the sun. But I feel like it's very hard for a lot of people to imagine a new decade, but on the moon or with the moon, beside the moon. Improving our relationship or our reliance or our interactions on the moon I think it really deserves a long, thoughtful pause.
Okay.
Because we've accomplished a lot on reaching the lunar surface and acquiring materials to study here. And we continue to do tests and studies that are often probably unnoticed or unacknowledged. So I guess in summary, it's the new frontier. It's the real frontier. It's the next frontier.
Right on. I see stuff like this and I genuinely get giddy. It's been the thing that has been driving me since the beginning. I'm a big fan of space-based solar power. That's what got me into space in the first place. And when I started looking at the Lunar Space Elevator about 11, 12 years ago, one of the eureka moments that we had was that we could build the space-based solar power system from the lunar surface, rather than try to lift all of the system in with normal conventional rocketry. And by that point, neither SpaceX nor Blue Origin were doing any significant work yet. So it wasn't. The idea of reusable rocketry was still pretty unknown. And so the idea of kind of going to the moon, using the moon as resources that could build space-based solar power, that was a pretty exciting moment. And in 2008, during the early part of the Obama administration, there was talk about going back to the moon in a significant way. And then it didn't really happen. And then it's been a long time coming, right? And I feel like I've been at this for 20 years, wanting the moon as my primary target. And and to get a sentence where the decade of the moon has begun, I don't think it's the decade of the moon. I think this step is a step that should be considered for, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. That this is humanity's like first real step out into the solar system and beyond. So I'm pretty excited about that. He has a pretty long article here about what specifically is happening. It was supposed to launch yesterday. It got postponed. I believe it's gonna launch super early this morning. I might stay up for this one. This one's historic, right? But think about it. You had Capstone launch a couple months ago. That was the first step back to the moon. And then most people know about Artemis launching a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. It's just, I think, kind of astounding that this stuff is starting to happen now. I don't think Capstone really got the attention that it deserves, but it was the first real trip back to the moon I would say it's kind of the precursor to everything else. We had the L-Cross mission about little over 10 years ago. There's a lunar orbiter. Like it's not like we haven't been there, but this is the start of something different. This mission from iSpace, I think it's pretty significant. Taylor, are you aware of a program called the Google Lunar X Prize?
No, I can't say I am.
Right. I would argue that a lot of people don't have that background. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about. So we've got iSpace and we've got Space.il. India tried going back to the moon, but that was on a different program. So, I think everybody knows that India crash landed on the moon. I think everybody knows that Israel crash landed on the moon. That's $250 million worth of craters between those two programs. Maybe it's only 200 million, but it's still a lot. It's still a lot. But these organizations, Space.il and iSpace, they've been working at this since 2008. 2008, the Google Lunar X Prize was founded, and the X Prize Foundation at that point had only run two other events. The X Prize that kind of launched the reusable rocketry environment that we live in now. That was a $10 million prize that Paul Allen paid for and Burt Rutan won. They spent $20 million to win a $10 million prize. But I would argue that the world that we live in now is a direct result of that effort, that the reusable rocketry really got its start. Now, that was a horizontal takeoff system, not the vertical takeoff system that Blue Origin and SpaceX are doing. But it's certainly a precursor of Virgin Orbit, Virgin Galactic. I was there when the X Prize was won, and I clearly remember seeing Richard Branson on the flight line, kind of imagining the future. So that was a pretty big deal. And so the next thing that they did after succeeding with the X Prize was Google came in and they offered about, $25 million in prizes to go to the moon. As a private company, you had to go to the moon, drive a robot half a kilometer, and send back high definition video. Because people were still skeptical that we hadn't been to the moon. Like there was still the folks that think we didn't get to the moon at all. And so sending back video was a vitally important component. And it was very, very hard to send high def video back in 2009, 2010. The tech wasn't there. Believe it or not, the video was one of the hardest parts to solve. Now, fast forward, the Google Lunar X Prize was ultimately not claimed. It was closed in 2018. But both of these companies and two more, Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines. I'm not sure about Intuitive Machines, but I know that Astrobotic was also a part of the Google Lunar X Prize. And all four of these companies are sending hardware to the moon. Certainly three, and maybe all four. All three for sure launched as a part of the GLXP. And that's pretty exciting, right? So even though the original goal wasn't met within the time frame, they left it open for 10 years. The result of at least three private companies going to the moon, all of that came out of the GLXP. So, yeah, okay, it's been a while since that happened, but I think it's a pretty important part of the story, right? Does that make sense?
I would have to agree. It does. It totally does.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why I like talking to a guy like, oh yeah, here we go. This is another detail here that this mission, even though it launches early this morning, it's taking the slow path to the moon. And in fact, Astrobotic and Intuitive Machines are launching early in January because they're taking a more direct path. They actually could land first. So I think that's a pretty interesting, the folks who've been working on this for more than a decade are launching within 60 days of each other. I find that pretty amazing as well. And then the last thing is, let's not close out without talking about China. I think at this point we can discount Russia's efforts to go back to the moon while they have signed paperwork that says they're going to go back and work with China on the moon. So far as I know, there's not been any actual budget allocated for that. Whereas China's doing real work on the moon. We're going to talk about China in a little bit, so I'm going to hold off on that. But that's what the excitement's about. Humanity's going to land some more hardware on the moon, and I think everybody knows that China has operational robot and operational robot on the far side of the moon right now, and that they've been there nearly 4 years. That's a whole lot of day-night cycles, right? 14 day, a 14-day night. That's a pretty powerful technology that China's working on. So good for them. Nice job, guys. Keep up the good work. Taylor, you have any questions about any of that stuff?
I kind of have an overarching question, and that is, this is more of an opinion. Mike, I want your opinion on, because I remember, in grade school and high school and such, learning of the historical arms races and the various races amongst various regions and countries and such. And one of the, I guess, latter terms was the space race, right? So I'm kind of curious, would you say that this is a new space race, or this is just another time stamp in the original space race? How can someone like how can we consider it? Should we even consider it a race? Is it a marathon? How would you describe this perpetual attempts of being better and being more accurate and just trying to achieve more milestones?
So the space race concept comes up kind of again and again. I would say that kind of round one, the Americans pretty clearly won. That was, to the moon within, before this decade is out. And checkbox, we did that. The space race idea has come up a lot, especially in the last maybe 2 or 3 years. I don't, up until, I'm not joking, up until a week ago, I would have said, no, it's not a space race. No, it's not a space race. A week ago, I would have said that. I'll tell you the differences. So originally, the Apollo days, there were 2 budgets, and budgets matter, okay? There were 2 nations, there were 2 budgets, and 1 goal. The Soviets, the Americans, the Soviets, the Americans, and the moon. That was it. That was the entirety of everything in space. 2 budgets, 2 organizations, 1 goal. Whereas now, there's 77 national space agencies. There's thousands of companies, hundreds that are very well funded in the multi-million, tens of million, hundreds of million, and in fact, billion level. That's really important because that's kind of stops being a race, because now it's different destinations, different targets, different goals. If you're sending a constellation to low Earth orbit and you're doing synthetic aperture radar, there's 3 other companies up there doing it and 2 governments. Is that a race, or is that just, that's your business model, right? So up until a week ago, I would have said, no, there's not a race. But last week, the Biden administration came up with a new cislunar strategic policy for science and technology, and they actually used the word first in a federal policy that talks about settlement on the moon, permanent settlement on the moon. So that is the very first time I have seen a federal document say first anything. And when you say first, I think that's throwing down the gauntlet to restart a brand new space race. And again, you got to have 2 willing participants with the same goal. We know that China wants to go to the moon. We know that they want to have a permanent settlement. I just told you I don't think that Russia can be an active participant. We do know that ESA is very actively interested. Would the European Space Agency be able to field a permanent lunar settlement? I don't think so, but they do have the resources. I don't think they would focus sources. That's my assessment. I'm not saying they can't. I just don't think that they would. So I think we might be in a new era of a brand new, started last week space race, but we haven't heard whether or not China is willing to be in the race. So right now, it's us who said first. We don't know if anybody else is going to play. So I'm going to say TBD on that. The first race we won. I think we have a good shot of winning if there is a second race, but I'm not committed to that. And with hundreds or thousands of organizations aiming after dozens or hundreds of separate projects, I don't think that qualifies as a race. Clear?
I would say that's a fair, that's fair. That's clear.
Cool. All right. If there's not, are there any other questions on this? I want to move on to the next article. And by the way, let me check in with Doug Plata. It's always great having you here, Doug. Let me see what you're writing because I haven't had a chance to look at that. The moon is going to be the place for space development. Absolutely 100% agree. In 10 years, there'll be thousands of people on the moon thanks to Starship. Thousands in 10 years. I don't know if I agree with that, but I would say dozens moving to hundreds. There may be 1,000 that go back and forth. If you're talking about contiguous operation, I don't know if it's going to be thousands, but dozens moving to hundreds, I definitely agree with. Right now, today, there are 13 people in orbit. China has maxed out its space station. In fact, that wasn't the immediate article I was going to go to, but let me jump to it first. Hold on just one second. Your question here, Doug, or your comment, so just bear with me. So right now there's 13 people on orbit. China just sent 3 more up. The current 3 that are up there are going to come down soon, a couple days. And 6 is their maximum. So this is a test. This is to stress test their system to make sure that 6 can comfortably operate up there. It is remarkable to me how quickly China was able to build their space station. I think it was 3 years from start to finish. It took the international partners of the ISS, I think, 15 years. I don't know how long the Chinese development process took, but from construction to deployment was remarkably fast for what a complex system it is. There's 2 Americans, 3 Russians, and 2 Europeans. I don't know the makeup of the 2 Europeans up on the ISS right now. So that's 13 people in space. I think that is remarkable. It's taken 20 years to get there. But I don't think that's where we're going to stick, right? Because we know that there's at least 5 very credible, multi-hundred million funded space station companies. At least 3 that are multi-hundred million, 3 more that are credible, and maybe 2 more that are less credible, 3 more that are less credible. So to say that there's going to be thousands on the moon, as big a fan as I am of Starship, I don't agree that it's going to be thousands, but dozens or hundreds, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Taylor, do you have something you want to say?
I'm kind of thinking about just the basic update on human population numbers. So on this marble, we have 8 billion people. And I mean, 1,000, I don't know, I can't off the top of my head imagine what that decimal point fraction is of 1,000 out of 8 billion. But I do, for whatever reason, still, lean towards what you just said. I too cannot imagine. I suppose it's probably my personal and professional limitation of imagining 1,000 people migrating and agreeing to on such an ambitious pilgrimage or visitation. I mean, I don't know. It's having a concept of how fast and how successfully and exponentially we have solved technological challenges and faced more important ones. I'm just still chewing on that number between dozens, hundreds, and 1,000.
Right. Yeah. No. He goes on to say, whoever's the first to sell their house on Earth and move to the moon or Mars indefinitely will be where humanity will first start moving beyond Earth. And that's it, right? Somebody is going to just sell their house and decide. That's what happened with European settlement into the Americas. People just left. They just decided that there's a better world out there for me, and I'm just going to go. And I do think that's going to happen. I think Starship and all of the other breakthroughs that happen as a result of Starship, all of the other, because it's not just SpaceX, right? It's Blue and it's Virgin and it's Sierra and Rocket Lab, and there's 6 or 7 currently operating reusable rocketry companies. There are 22, I won't say companies because it's nations also. There's 22 other nations and companies all working on reusable rocketry, 22 active programs, funded programs. So it's not just about Starship anymore. It's the things that are catalyzed as a result of proving that you can start a fire, turn off a fire, and restart a fire on a rocket engine on the way to and from orbit. That reusability has forced the European Space Agency to rebuild some of their rockets. That reusability has emboldened China to decide that they are going to build a rocket that is 50% bigger than SpaceX, than Starship, 150 tons to orbit. Now, they're not claiming to have the launch cadence that Starship is. Starship is aiming for 3 flights a day at 100 tons. China is not claiming that, but they are saying they are going to build a 150-ton to orbit system. So if you factor in 22 organizations all building reusable rocketry, all are going to seek customers going to space. A fraction of them are definitely going to the moon. A fraction definitely are. So that is super exciting. Doug, I think I'm writing a paper on Starship Singularity. So as soon as I have that released, I'll share it with you. That was my main task over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, was to work on that. So as soon as I got it, I'll share it with you. I'd love to have your comments on it. Okay, so let's talk about, since we're talking about China here for a second, I kind of have already covered this. Oh, I'm not sharing this. I thought I was. So I've kind of already talked about this. I think that's super cool. My school is the International Space University, and I believe that space done well is space done collaboratively, internationally. So I might have some frustrations with the regime of China. Certainly the protests happening out there right now are indicative of other people having frustrations with the regime of China. But this stuff like this, it just makes me very happy. It's great to see this. It would be awesome to be able to work together. I loved the old Apollo's Soyuz days where the handshake in space was a tool for detente. I think that's super helpful. Let me post this link here in the chat. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about it other than congratulations. There's talk of the the United States already had a point where we did not have access to orbit, and we had to pay the Russians $70 million a seat. We did that for years. We propped up the Russian space program for most of a decade until we got, we rebuilt our capabilities to get to and from the space station. there was a gap. They called it a gap. And there's talk of, is there going to be a space station gap, a destination gap? I really don't think so. There are a lot of developments in space happening right now for space stations. And I think this gives us a shot to have a lot of new active space stations going. But it's just really cool to see how quickly China has done what they've done, and how kind of dedicated budgets can make a lot of big things happen in a pretty short amount of time. So, any questions on that, Taylor?
So I don't really have specific questions on that, but no, let's bridge into another topic for now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So this one caught my attention. First of all, I don't know how they built an algorithm that can identify materials that don't yet exist. I thought this was pretty cool. And for some background that's personal to LiftPort, we tried making carbon nanotubes in order to build a space elevator. I'm just going to step away for a second and show off some stuff. But we made some carbon nanotubes. We made some of the world's first strings. A lot of people don't know that, but we made some of the world's very first strings. Now, this stuff is junk by comparison of standards today, 20 years later. But it was really hard to do that. Our small team, we spent $200,000 to $300,000, which doesn't sound like much in the scope of the 20 billion that have been spent over the last 20 years. It may be $50 billion over the last 20 years trying to work out materials, but it's really hard to do that. So an AI that can figure out how to make a lot of materials, and this article is fascinating. They where's the line? This transformative tool that can greatly expand our ability to explore new material chemistries and structures. So, it is estimated that more than 1 million of the 31 million materials investigated are stable enough to use. So in my early days on the elevator, I learned an awful lot about materials, and to say that it is the building block of civilization is accurate. Everything that we have, if it's made out of atoms, that's what we use to build our civilization. And empires have risen and fallen by a decimal point change in material strength. If you were on the wrong side of the Iron Age or the Bronze Age, you either won. If you were on the wrong side of the Iron Age or Bronze Age, you lost, right? Materials were, and that might seem like thousands of years ago, but materials were the difference between winning World War I and losing World War II and winning World War II. Materials made the difference in tires, the rubber of tires, the vulcanization of tires was a national secret, and it was the difference of whether the infantry trucks could get you from point A to point B, and that was the difference of World War II, winning or losing. So a computer that can figure out properties of new materials, the obvious next step is to evaluate those materials for other things. in the space elevator community, they call it unobtainium, a material that you need for the space elevator. By the way, you don't need that stuff for a lunar elevator. That's a whole nother topic we could have. The materials for the lunar elevator currently exist, but to have an AI that figures out materials and then figures out what those materials could be used for, that is worth buckets of money. That might be freight cars full of money if you can figure that out. So good job to that. I think that's pretty amazing. I'm going to probably follow up on that someday. I think it's pretty remarkable. Any questions about that, Taylor?
More so a working thought than a question, but yeah, I mean, I feel like because we have so much access as consumers on a scale, right? Not everyone has the same amount of access to anything, pretty much. But at the end of the day, everything comes from just a few, like you said, atoms, just a few chemical base models, just a few, DNA is ATCG, right? Like the genetic code is the founding material of life is what it is, right? We manipulate it for our benefit or for our not benefit. And everything at the end of the day, like you and I are carbon based. The materials and the technology that we're using to correspond and to stream right now in some way are related to carbon. And it's just fascinating to think that carbon can be our best friend and our solution, or it can be and kind of currently is our self-destruction, our undoing, we're fouling our own nest with carbon. And
Right.
some may agree, some may not agree. But
Yeah, no, the materials we build our world in build our whole world, and I just find it kind of fascinating that they've figured out a way that's kind of like streamline that process. This is probably our last topic. I'm gonna talk quickly about this one and one other. I'm a big fan of Boston Dynamics. I've been kind of watching them for quite a while. This article is definitely worth reading. There's some depth to it that is that's typically missing. But Boston Dynamics, if you've seen the videos of Spot on YouTube, if you want to spend get sucked down into the internet for a little while, type Boston Dynamics in YouTube and just see what pops up. It's pretty remarkable. I learned a lot from this article. I didn't realize they're nearly 30 years old. And I knew their history, right? Because I guess I have been watching them for a while, but the robots that they've been building up till now have really been testing the bounds of what's possible for robotics for a couple different designs. They have typically used biomimicry in their decisions of what kind of robots to build. They have a history going back to DARPA funding, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, funding them. But now they're kind of moving in, how do we build robots we can get paid for? Up until now, they've mostly been a research and development lab that's come up with some pretty remarkable stuff that other companies have copied, right? They're not necessarily making all the money, even though they're making some of the best breakthroughs. Google owned them for a little while. There was a lot of frustration and anger over their military contracts. They got spun out. SoftBank owned them for a little while. They were a money pit. Ultimately, Hyundai bought them. And they're like, look, we bought you to make money, so let's go make some money. But their history is profound. I think it's super important. They have some just really brilliant designs and architectures, really worth taking a look at this company and following its history. So I want to stick with that. Quick comments on that, Taylor. Otherwise, I'm going to move to the last article because we got to close out the day.
It's just pretty cool that, it's gone from, I remember the first time I saw a Boston Dynamic bot on Twitter, and it's cool to finally go from a person who was fearful and concerned to, okay, I'm not okay, the bots, maybe we can be friends as much as non-sentient objects can be friends with,
That brings up a point I had forgotten, but so this is pretty controversial. A few days ago, gosh, I don't know if I could find the link quickly. A few days ago, a big city, might have been Los Angeles, committed to letting robots use lethal force. It had something to do with bomb squad developments, but then someplace else has basically taken a clone, not an actual Boston Dynamics clone of their robot called Spot, and they've strapped some weaponry on it and deployed it using a big mega drone from China. So that completely revolutionizes battlefield tactics. As a former U.S. Marine, the idea of fighting a robot dog with an M16 or an AK-47, more likely, that is a spooky proposition. But I'll tell you something that does give me a little bit of hope is that Boston Dynamics and 4 other major robotics companies about 6 weeks ago formed a pact basically saying we will not make weapons out of our robots. We will not sell them to weapons systems companies. So they have banded together and say, robots for the good of the world. There are companies copying them, cloning them that are making weapons, but it's not Boston Dynamics and it's not the other companies in there. I'll try and find that link and see if I can get it posted here. So have some hope. Have some hope. BD is a pretty good company. From the outside looking in, I've been pretty impressed. All right, with that, I'm going to bring up one more article. So this one has been our most popular article on YouTube. On LinkedIn this week. We've gotten something like 30,000 views of it. People who know me know that I worked for a long time on the space elevator. I know this author, Dr. Cohen. This article goes into his early days as a master's student in 2004. That's when I met what is now Dr. Cohen, and I knew Professor Misra back in those days. I was actively working on the Earth elevator, and I remember many conversations with Stephen about this. So it's a pretty good read. I do not agree with some of the things in here. Not that I'm throwing anybody under a bus. I have a lot of good, smart friends who are working on Earth's elevator, and I hope that they are right and that I am wrong. I just don't think that they are. I think I am right. I don't think we can build an elevator on the Earth right now, which is why we focused on building one on the moon. And I like this article here, this line here. This is his quote, although I may come across as a space elevator advocate, the truth is I simply enjoy studying their mechanics in a world with monumental problems. Dreaming of such projects allows me to envision a scenario where we have become responsible custodians on this planet. And that's one of the reasons why I love the space elevator community, because they are visionary. They are trying to build something better. They're trying to build a better future. And with that, I'm going to close out. Thanks everybody for being a part of this. It's always great. I'm going to stop sharing here. Taylor, if you want to say goodbye, oh yes, and there's a question. They want to get the Discord channel. Give me a moment on that. Appreciate that. Let me see captions.
Yeah, Michael, while you're doing that, I'm really glad. This was a pretty neat discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing the feedback from our audience or audiences on whichever platform you may be on. We're on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and in the future we'll be on maybe your preferred, others, the audience will be on your preferred platform, whether it be Instagram or Pinterest. You'll see us there eventually, and we do have a very small and humble presence presently, but it will become more active. But yeah, the best way to pitch us more questions or ideas or thoughts, suggestions, or angry fist waving, you can do it in the Discord channel. We try to keep it amicable and respect everyone. All thoughts are welcome. But yeah, I look forward to chatting and hearing and learning from our audience on Discord.
Always great to have you all. Really appreciate this audience. It is building. We are growing. Our plan is that we capture the show live here on YouTube, and then we cut it up into parts and turn it into a podcast. So you'll see this coming up in the next few days. And for the new person I don't recognize, 2001, I appreciate that you came in. Thanks for your comments and reminding us about the Discord channel. If you wouldn't mind posting a note about where you came from and how you heard about this, that's also something we'd really like to know. All right, y'all. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.